very forceful statement about impeachment.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't brook any kind of maybe not.
Yeah.
What was the tipping point for that?
Well, it was obviously the event of the weekend when the reporting about the phone call became uh, now part of our history. I think the conduct of the president on that phone call was an abuse of power, and there's really no other remedy when you see that kind of abuse. And I say abuse of power because no public official, certainly the president, should ever use that kind of a conversation, which is about a bilateral relationship with another country, and in particular, it's a conversation about support for the military against an adversary of ours, by the way. Russia's an adversary. They're not just another country. They're an adversary. And for the first time since World War II, that country, Ukraine, became the subject of uh, kind of aggression we thought World War II was going to eliminate, which was another country seizing, annexing land within a community within that country. So when you're talking to that foreign leader about that topic or about any part of our bilateral relationship, use that opportunity to say, hey, we need you to do us a favor, though, meaning uh, we're gonna consider your request for javelins or any other military support, but you got to do us a favor that involves not just a domestic issue, an individual happens to be your potentially your political opponent. I just believe when an executive engages in that kind of conduct, you have to have a response. Now, the background is relevant as well. This is not likely the first time that the president uh, abused power, um, but it's the most glaring example that we have on the record. And as you know, we have both a memorandum of the phone call, which is very close to a transcript, and we have the details in the whistleblower report, which triggered the reporting and then triggered the inquiry.
What do you think will happen in the Senate? Do you think I have to do it if there's impeachment? Do you think?
I was surprised he was that clear this early. I thought he might wait and see if there was a way to, upon receipt of the vote of the House and the articles, if that happens. We don't know if that'll happen, but if it happens, I thought he might, Mitch McConnell's majority leader might try to dismiss it or not deal with it or kind of put it in the freezer. But he said he's got to deal with it. I don't think we know the result there, and the result that the Senate would have to come to if there are articles of impeachment that get to the Senate, and if the trial goes forward, which I assume it would if we got the articles, according to what he said. But at that point, you have a different question. It's not the question of should there be an inquiry, and then should we vote yes or no on this or that article, one article or more than one article of impeachment. The question in the Senate is not simply what's the nature of the articles of impeachment, but should that lead to removal from office? So that's a different standard. I would argue a higher standard um, that the Senate would have to deliberate about.
On the same subject of politics, Pennsylvania went Republican in the last presidential election,
Right.
which is the first, I think it was 36 years ago.
Yeah, I think since George Bush the first, George H.W., 1988. Whatever the math is from 88 to 16. I think your math is better than mine.
No, you're talking to journalists, we don't do that. But
were you an English major?
yes, I was.
Yeah, I was too. At least I'm willing to admit it, right?
Well, that's one of the things where you can do everything and do nothing.
Right.
But how is you're a senator from Pennsylvania, you're a Democrat. What can you do to turn the state back to a Democratic slide for the president?
Well, I have. I have some recent experience with that because I had an election in 2018
Mhm.
where I think we learned a lot about how to win a 2020 race. People are willing to listen to me. We'll see. Um, but I think we learned a lot in that race, and we were successful. We went from a state where the president won by 44,292 votes, not that I remember. Um, and then in our race, my margin ended up being 657,000, a little more than 657. So we learned some things. The governor had a big win as well, even higher. So we have to make sure that we apply the lessons of the 2018 campaign to the 2020 campaign. The president um, will, I think, to a significant degree, as the Republican nominee, would be stronger in 2020 than some of the candidates were in 2018 on the Republican side. It would be a close race, and it'd be hard fought. But one of the substantive, I'll just end with this. One of the best things I can do to make sure that people know what is at stake in that election, that presidential election, is to focus on fundamental issues. One of them, I think the leading issue, is in terms of the difference between his approach and my approach, or the Democratic approach versus the Republican approach, is healthcare. I mean, it's never been more clear of a difference between the parties, and I've articulated that there are three basic threats to healthcare: the lawsuit, the sabotage, and the budget cuts. The lawsuit is live. It's like side of the field.
That's the Obama.
That it would if the 18 Republican attorneys general from around the country, if they're successful at the appeals court level like they were at the district court, they've already won. It's already 1-0. They've got a 3-judge panel. 2 of the 3 judges are Republican appointees. If they're successful at that level, it may be lights out for the Affordable Care Act. Unless there was an appeal to the entire circuit, which they could deny. They don't have to take an appeal, what they call en banc, like the whole court, or an appeal to the Supreme Court, which again could, if they wanted to, not take the case. So the last stop would be the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that if that effort were successful, which I hope it's not, that would eliminate not just the coverage gains of the Affordable Care Act, 20 million people, almost 4,500 here in Venango County, but it would also take away the new protections that were provided to, some people believe it's over 100 million Americans, others say it's more like north of 150 million Americans. But all those protections for pre-existing conditions, young people being able to stay on their parents' insurance, 18 to 26, all of those new protections that are in place now would be taken away. Here's the frightening part about it: not just that the court would wipe it out, but there's no replacement that is commensurate with the effort that was undertaken in the Affordable Care Act. There's no replacement that's passed into law or likely to pass anytime soon. So even if the court said, we hereby declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, but we're going to give you a year to implement, we're going to delay the implementation of our court order. The kind of chaos that would ensue from that is hard to calculate.
What were the other 2? You said there were 3 reasons.
Yeah, the second threat is sabotage, which is an effort by the administration, literally from day one. The day the president was sworn into office, either the first thing he signed or one of the first things he signed, the order, which basically said to the federal agencies, take whatever steps you can to not implement or to make changes to undermine the Affordable Care Act. Now that's my language, but not basically giving a green light to sabotaging the system. That manifested itself in a couple of things the administration did starting in the early days of 17, which was, let's cut back on the advertising for the exchanges. So they cut the advertising by 90%. It was really nice of them to get my insurance on one of the exchanges, and maybe potentially able not just to get coverage, but to get a subsidy that will help me pay for the coverage. I may not know about it if the advertising is cut. We know, for example, from our history in Pennsylvania, that when television advertising and other advertising for the Children's Health Insurance Program was off the air, the number of people applying for children's health insurance would go way down. Constantly advertising, especially in this environment where people are hearing about a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, the president speaking against it, people get very confused. There's even evidence that people enrolled from Medicaid who were eligible because they thought they weren't eligible anymore. So all this undermining and confusion makes the advertising even more of an important issue. The other thing the administration did was begin to allow a series of waivers to states. Arkansas got a waiver and 18,000 people lost their Medicaid. Tennessee is one of the states now that will get a waiver which will allow them to experiment with, at the state level, caps on Medicaid, or block granting. So this is your block grant for Pennsylvania for Medicaid, and that's all you get. So you within the state have to do all you can on Medicaid in that finite dollar amount. Instead of what we traditionally have done in America is to say, we're going to give you, state of Pennsylvania, state of Tennessee, or whatever other state, we're going to give you the support you need to make sure that children from low-income families, especially most significant in rural areas, whether suburban or urban, suburban, rural, urban, or otherwise, if you're a child from a low-income family, we're going to give you the help that Medicaid provides. Good coverage and early screening and diagnosis and testing. If you have a disability, we're going to provide Medicaid for you. If you are a senior trying to get into a nursing home, even if you're from a middle-class family, Medicaid is going to help you get that long-term care. So all of this sabotage is relevant, and one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, plural, that the Census Bureau just announced about 2 weeks ago that 1.9 million fewer Americans are insured. One of the reasons for that, I would argue it's the leading reason, is this sabotage, where the number, and you see it on that chart there, you can see the number of uninsured was going way down after no progress for a long time, maybe a generation or more. The number of uninsured went way down, then it started to level off with the lawsuit. And that last bar, that last line on the graph there, is a projection, a prediction that the uninsured rate would go beyond where it was in 2009, and you'd have about 18 to 19% uninsured. So lawsuit sabotage, and the third one is cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. I'll say it fast: $1.5 trillion to Medicaid over 10 years, proposed by the administration, and not opposed by any Republican member of Congress that I'm aware of, and Medicare cut of $845 billion over 10 years. Both of those are wrong and destructive.
So obviously, this is your number one topic, and you're looking at some of the research. I mean, I have seen that. What about, and I believe it's Elizabeth Warren, Medicare for all? Is that a solution?
Well, first of all, I'd say preliminarily, it's interesting to have debates about what could come next and how we should expand healthcare. I think the most important thing right now for Democrats, and I say this to every Democratic member of Congress, and I say this to every single presidential candidate, including the one I support, Joe Biden. I would say to all of them, now is the time for fighting to stop the lawsuit, or at least we have an obligation to make people aware of it. Most Americans are not aware it's even happening. I would say that number is more than 90% of Americans, just not getting the attention that the repeal debate got. Fighting against this sabotage and calling it out, and fighting against the budget cuts that nobody knows about because they're still in the realm of the potential. That's more important than any idea on the table. And I know some Democrats are offended by that, but I'm just going to keep saying it. Our number one job is to stop what's happening right now in real time. The undermining the coverage gains and the protection gains of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Notice I didn't use the reference to the prior president's last name, because that's not what the name of it is. It's not Obamacare. It is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I worked hard to pass it, and we got to preserve it. It's not about a politician's name. It's about protections that people have a right to expect. And the question is, will America fall backwards, or at least maintain where we are on protections for these basic protections that Americans should have, that an insurance company should not have so much power over your life and say, I know you have coverage. I know you're making your premium payments. I know you want your child to get coverage and treatment. But we, the insurance company, are saying no, because your child has a pre-existing condition. And we're not going to cover that, and we're not. Or if we cover your child or cover you for a pre-existing condition, we're going to charge you more. That's an abomination. That is un-American. It's wrong. And we finally got over that hurdle when an insurance company is barred by law from doing that. We're about to go backwards, where the lawsuit would put us.
So you're saying though that the Affordable Care Act is the one to keep, rather than Medicare for All or any of the other programs that have been.
Defend what we have, because we if we let our guard down, they'll run right over us while we're talking about some new idea. Now, the one thing the Democrats are unified on, we're not doing a very good job of fighting against lawsuits, sabotage, and budget cuts. We're doing a bad job on that. But one thing we're unified about and clear about is we want to get to universal coverage. Now, some people would say the way to get to universal coverage is the Medicare for All proposal. I believe the way to get there is to say, let's first of all fight to the death, not literally, but fight hard to defend what we have, not just in the Affordable Care Act, but Medicare and Medicaid. Then add to that a Medicare at 50 or a public option, which I supported in the lead up to the Affordable Care Act. That was dropped. I think it was a mistake to drop it, but I didn't win that fight. So in other ways to expand that coverage. So instead of having 20 million new enrollees in healthcare, let's get that number up, because we know the number.
You said Medicare
Now,
for 50?
Yeah, starting at age 50, yeah. So you can buy into Medicare, have a public option, so there's more competition. Some people have proposed further Medicaid expansion, or maybe have Medicaid on the exchanges. There are a lot of options out there, but here's the big concern I have, which no one in Washington who supports Medicare for All has given a good answer. So far, I haven't heard a good answer. What happens if you have Medicare for All? What happens to the Medicaid program? I was at a town hall recently, and I asked that question to one of the constituents who was there, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, Medicare for All will cover that." Well, what does that mean? I mean, a lot of families, and we met a lot of them. I met a lot of them over the years, but especially when repeal was on the table, and they were worried about their son or daughter with a disability, sometimes more than one disability, sometimes a profound disability. What happens to them? Do they get Medicaid, and do they get the same coverage, or not? What happens to the children's health? My father started that program here in Pennsylvania, then became a national model. What happens to a lot of those families like the CHIP coverage, or the other families that get Medicaid for their children, they like that coverage. What happens to them? We're just going to say you can't have it anymore. We're going to give you something new, with the promise that it's going to be all okay. I mean, I'm not sure about that. Then what do you do? What do you do with people that have employer coverage that are satisfied with what they like? What most people are telling me is, I want you to work to lower costs, and especially lower prescription drug costs. In other words, if Republicans would set aside their repeals, their lawsuits, their cuts, all that stuff, and their sabotage, and came to us and said, we're going to put that on the back burner for now. We're going to work with you, Mr. Democrat, on lowering costs, and especially lowering prescription drug costs. If they want to do that, my fists will come down. I'll say, I'm not going to fight anymore. We're going to work together to lower prescription drug costs and lower healthcare costs. That's what I hear from people. Most people say to me, don't say to me repeal. Don't say to me, we need some brand new idea. Most people say to me, let's improve what we have, which means getting more people coverage, but get the damn cost down. That's what they say to me over and over and over again. And a lot of times they hear neither party addressing that. So my point is that our country is great for a lot of reasons, our military, economy, all of that. But one of the reasons we're great is because we made a decision a couple decades ago to say that if you're a child in Venango County, in Oil City, and your family's income is X and makes you eligible for coverage for Medicaid, we're going to have that coverage. We're going to make sure you never lose it. We're not going to take it away from you. If you're over the age of 65, at some point in the twilight years of your life, you need to be in a skilled nursing facility, and your family spends down all their assets and there's Medicare providers. The families with have a loved one with a disability. What happens to them? So I think a lot of Americans are saying that neither party is really answering their questions, and most of the questions I get are about cost.
Well, the Democrat, how do you hold your party's feet to the fire on that issue? That has to be frustrating to you, I'm sure, the Democrat. And I guess a threefold question on the word sabotage. Okay, Congress are not sincere in their efforts to come up with a viable replacement, and other things that were with the ACA were there's been complaints that, well, people said that they could keep their doctors, and they're finding out later on that they can't. Another thing they said were, especially young people who are not working, they say, well, heck, it's just cheaper for me to pay the penalty instead of paying the premiums. And basically, you're defeating the purpose of getting more people on health care if they're willing to take the hit on I'll just take the penalty. Would you admit that there are problems within the existing ACA system?
No question. I agree with that. And that's why we should be working on fixing those problems. If the penalty, and I haven't seen a study that validates that, but there has been some reporting on that. And if that's the case, we should revisit that. Maybe we have to think of other ways to get young people enrolled, and because if you don't, if you have young people not enrolling, and you have one plan for the healthy and the young, and one plan for the older and the sicker, we're gonna have that death spiral, and that other system is gonna spiral out of control, and you're not gonna have you need a mix of young and old, you need a mix of healthy and unhealthy to make the math work. But I think that's what we should be working on. But here's another thing the administration tried to do. In terms of I would still use the word sabotage. They're proposing these what are called skinny plans. They go to a young person and say, I got a deal for you. We're going to give you a bare bones insurance plan, and it is bare bones, so it's going to be cheaper, and you're going to love it because it's going to be so cheap that you're going to be able to afford it. But it doesn't offer you much, so don't get sick. But you're going to like it. Now, some young people might be attracted to that because they're trying to pay their student loan, and we haven't done enough to help them reduce that cost or get the interest rate of the student loans down. Trying to pay the student loans, trying to pay their rent, trying to do their job every day. So they're attracted to that. The problem is, if you lure away enough young people away from other pools, where you have a mixed, diverse pool, and they go into these other plans, you're going to cause a death spiral to the system over time. So the skinny plans idea, I think, is another way to sabotage the system. Look, I really believe, and I hate to say this, but I'm going to tell you the truth, what I believe. I believe that Republican politicians in Washington want the Affordable Care Act to fail, and they're willing to either take actions that will help the exchanges to collapse. They haven't, despite all the efforts to undermine them. They would take actions, or at least allow, by their silence, to allow the Trump administration to continue to take action to sabotage. Because otherwise, where are Republican members of Congress? Where are their voices? The Trump administration proposes skinny plans. When the Trump administration cuts the advertising, when the Trump administration reduces, I mentioned this before, reduces the enrollment period, where are those voices saying, look, I may not have voted for the Affordable Care Act, I'm a Republican member of Congress, but that is wrong to take an action that will help to collapse the insurance
And
exchange.
they don't have anything to
And they have no replacement. Now they say, oh yes, we do. And they ran around in 2018, but I think we exposed them pretty well, saying, oh, I'm a Republican, I don't like the Affordable Care Act, but I'm for protections for pre-existing conditions. Well, guess what? You gotta tell us how you're gonna do that. You gotta pay for it. So that means you have to, if you're saying you're gonna replace the Affordable Care Act, here's what you gotta do. You can't just file a bill that says we're gonna protect. You tell the American people how you will protect them if they have a pre-existing condition. You gotta pay for it. You gotta tell people how you're gonna cover 20 million people a different way. You can't just have a bill. You gotta meet the coverage gains, and you have to make sure that all the protections are in place that we have now, not just on pre-existing conditions. That's the one that gets the most attention. So if you're a Republican saying you got a replacement bill, you can't just file any old bill. And by the way, you have to declare your opposition to the lawsuit. You can't say that you're for protecting pre-existing conditions if you're for this lawsuit. And you have to tell us how cutting Medicaid by $150 billion each and every year for 10 years, and cutting Medicare by about 84 to 85 billion each and every year for 10 years, how that's going to protect people from the devastation that would come from that. So look, if Republicans have a different way to get this done, a different way to provide all the protections, and I mean all of them, a different way to cover 20 million people, and a different way to expand coverage beyond the 20 million, I'm all ears. But all they proposed to date has been a series of repeal bills, which now has morphed into this lawsuit, which is why I call the lawsuit the goddamn lawsuit. That's my little expression for what it is. That's what I feel about it. It's a goddamn lawsuit that will bring devastation to a lot of Americans. And if you're an American out there that thinks, oh, I'm good, I'm protected, I got employer coverage, and that Obamacare thing out there isn't for me. I'm separated from that. You are at risk. If you have a pre-existing condition and this lawsuit prevails, you got problems. And by the way, your premiums are going to go through the roof. A lot of people will lose coverage, and I think it'll hurt the economy as well. Other than that, it's great.
Let me ask you, I mean, I know that's your number one priority.
I'll make one more point about it, if you let me.
Yes.
I can leave it with you. So this is an article from yesterday's Washington Post. The Affordable Care Act, future and doubt. Evidence grows that it has saved lives. Studies for people covered in Michigan, Ohio. There's a couple of other states, and they kind of walk through a series of studies. Look, the Affordable Care Act has problems, no question about it. We have to make changes. We've got to get costs down. It's not doing enough to reduce costs. We didn't do enough to reduce prescription drug costs. I got some ideas about how to do that. But the one thing which I think is certain is covering more people helps all of us. When the guy next to you has health care, that is a damn good result for you. The guy next to you does not have health care because you're going to pay for him when he goes to the emergency room at the last minute and uses that high cost care as primary care physician. But I'd urge any American to read the Washington Post story, September 30th, Amy Goldstein, with the Affordable Care Act, future and doubt, evidence grows that it saved lives. So it is, and it's giving people the security that they often didn't have before. And you know, in Pennsylvania, 1.1 million people got it. Almost 800, or at least somewhere between 700,000 and 800,000 of the 1.1 million got it through Medicaid expansion. And by the way, it's helping enormously. Medicaid expansion is to deal with the opioid crisis and the larger, broader substance use disorder crisis. The governor's office tells us 50,000 people in the state are getting treatment for a substance use disorder problem because they have Medicaid expansion. We didn't know that when we passed the Affordable Care Act, that Medicaid expansion would become directly relevant to, necessary to, treatment for a substance use disorder problem, but it's turned out to be of great benefit to those who need help. So, I'll stop talking about it.
No. Good about it. Let me ask you a couple quick questions, but I know, because I know Tanya is waiting. Reparations, do you favor that?
I favor the bill that allows us to study and make recommendations. And that's where we are right now. What we have before, it's really a question, right? I can't say I support it without knowing the scope of the issue and knowing recommendations. That's why the bill that a lot of people have misconceptions about, the bill is basically study it, make recommendations. And I think both are essential. And I think that's strong enough to study a problem and consider recommendations. After the recommendations are made to Congress, then the question is, do you favor taking action? Do you favor funding? How do you do that? How do you pay for it? How do you? So those questions are there. But my God, when you consider the history of this country and the world, starting in 1619, when the first slaves arrived, to see that and to study how it's still adversely impacting our country, then I don't know what we should study. That's an important topic, and there's never been, to my knowledge, a comprehensive review of the impact on people's lives and the impact on even the America of today, and then a series of recommendations.
The Green New Deal, this use of fossil fuels by 2030?
Well, here's what I think is beneficial to that resolution. If you look at the first half of that resolution, it out the reality, the gravity of climate change. And just to quickly summarize, my belief is climate change is real. It's caused by, and has been caused over many generations by human activity. And third, we got to do something about it. I also believe that climate change, one terrible condition of climate change is famine and darkness and hunger and death. The potential for not just millions of people, but tens of millions of people to die across the world is very high. A lot of them being children who will be malnourished solely because of the effects of climate change and will die. And we have to ask ourselves, is that the kind of world we want to live in and take no action? So that's kind of that's first part of the resolution talks about the threats posed by climate change, which are now documented. The science is very clear. Number two is it outlines a series of steps we can take. Something as fundamental as critical infrastructure. Some of the projections for just critical infrastructure on the coast, but even beyond the coast, are into the trillions of dollars. We've got to consider that. And it outlines a series of steps we could take. The last part of the resolution goes through a series, or outlines a series of mandatory goals and commitments that we would make. The problem I have with that is, number one is the resolution in the House and the Senate, to my knowledge, hasn't gone through any kind of exhaustive hearing hearing process. There are a couple of specific mandatory goals that I need information on how we're going to get there. It talks about a I can't remember the exact words, a living wage level for every single American. That's mandatory. I don't know how you provide that. I mean, I understand that raising the minimum wage would help a lot of minimum wage earners. I also believe that a middle class tax cut that is robust and substantial would be a way to do the equivalent of a wage raise. I don't know how you get to that. I need more information on how you do that. There's also a reference to 100% carbon-free emissions in a rather short time frame. I think it's about 10 years. I don't know how we get to that in a state where we're still about a little more than 20% coal, roughly 30 natural gas, and almost 40 nuclear power. I don't know how that works with our current, and that's just one example of one state. So I have a lot of questions about it, and I also have questions about how the mandatory goals are going to be achieved. I think the way to approach this is let's focus on climate change and what we have to do right now. The other issues that are directly related to what happens to we know that climate change will most adversely affect the poor, most adversely affect communities that don't have a lot of advantages right now. If you're rich and you live in a wealthy community, you can probably, for at least a period of time, escape the ravages of climate change. But if you're low income and you can't move, you're struggling, you're probably going to be most adversely affected. We need to be focused on the actions we take to help those Americans. But I don't see how you do that all in one bill, because these are big goals, and you've got to deal with them in a way that's thorough about the process. I think it's probably better to break it up into a series of bills where we can study each proposal that way. Having said that, doing nothing on climate change is morally unacceptable. It should be morally unacceptable anyway.
It's also been said that we can talk about climate change all we want. Well, documented that a major problem with climate change is the devastation for the rainforest. They say that 30% of the problem is from the rainforest and how we're just totally decimating it. They said, so everything else that we're talking about is almost basically moot. I mean, would you say that that's a valid argument?
Well, I'd certainly say that's a huge concern that we've got to consider. And how do you engage with other countries for them to take action?
Yeah.
Whether it's in South America or whether it's dealing with China as the carbon emitter that China is, and
that's
India.
a big one too. Yeah.
But we can't do any of that if we're checking out. In other words, you got to be at the table. And I think our country should not just be at the table, but be the leader at the table. That's why withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords and having no game plan. I don't know what the game plan is. Withdraw from Paris, and what's your game plan to deal with the problem? Or maybe you deny the problem. That's a whole other set of challenges. But if you withdraw from Paris, if you take the Clean Power Plan, which was the last administration's idea, and kneecap it, just knock the legs out from under it, and say it's kind of the don't worry, if you don't think about it, it won't happen strategy. No one believes that that's an appropriate approach. So I would argue we need, if it's not clean power, then tell me what it is. But we need a domestic strategy to deal with climate change. We also need an international strategy, which means participating in Paris and leading the world, pushing China. Now, there's some new reporting that China is starting to wrestle with this problem more than they have in the past. That's I haven't read through all that. I don't want to speculate, but there's some indications that China knows that China's worse off if they just start building more coal-fired plants. But that took them too long to come to that conclusion if they reach it. But I just think we have to take action. The other thing we got to do, and Democrats are at fault for not talking about this. You got to have a plan for the workers. got to make sure that workers are taken care of. And not just like some kind of minor handout or some go-to-job training strategy. Neither is adequate. We need a robust American plan to make sure that if you lose your job because of steps we have to take to combat the urgent threat of climate change, the American people through our government is going to provide you an opportunity, and it is going to do everything humanly possible to make you whole. And it might get expensive. We may have to say to higher income Americans, you know what? You're not getting tax cuts this year, rich person. We're going to make sure that we take care of workers who are displaced by climate change. And we got to be honest and direct and clear about that. And Democrats who talk about climate change and give speeches about how urgent the threat is happen to be right about climate change, but if half of your speech isn't about the worker, or a portion of your speech isn't about the worker, you are not doing your job, Democratic politician. Gotta focus on the workers. I thought we were the party that's supposed to stand up for workers. Too many Democrats talk about climate change and they say to the worker, get out of the way, we gotta get to our climate change plan. Democrats are wrong when they do that. I'm gonna call them out when they talk about their climate change plan and then just stop talking. Gotta talk about your plan for workers. The good news is, I've heard some of the best advocates for dealing with climate change most recently propose very specific to help people in extraction industries, whether it's a coal miner or other worker who's been displaced. And I've been fighting other battles on behalf of coal miners for their health care and their pensions, but they need communities need help. We got to be there.
Let me switch gears for a minute. The other two, obviously national subjects are immigration and gun control. Gun control, you've come down pretty closely on that. The background checks and all of that. That's not changed for you.
No.
You should immigrate.
We should, just real quick on that, we should debate and vote on at least the two measures that Majority Leader McConnell promised. The background check bill, either the H.R. 8, which is the House bill, which I think is the best bill, or Senator Toomey and Senator Manchin's proposal, which I think would get a lot of support. I don't know if it would pass. And then the Extreme Risk Protection Order legislation, which is what some people call red flag, but we're told that's an inappropriate way to talk about it because it misleads people. It's called Extreme Risk Protection Order legislation. The order that a court would issue would be an Extreme Risk Protection Order, where the individual would be accorded due process rights because, or I should say, would be accorded due process because it comes before the court after a showing by an individual. A family member says they're acting in violent ways or they're threatening and they have a gun and I'm worried. Or law enforcement would make that same.
And those two you support, those two.
I do. I hope we could do more than that, but that would be a good start. And by the way, none of the proposals I support, not a single one of them, in any way threatens the Second Amendment or threatens the right of a law-abiding American to own a gun for hunting, for protection, or both, or for sport. So I know that's what the argument gets made over and over again, but I think we can do this in a bipartisan fashion. But the majority leader should, instead of saying what he said recently, I hope he changes his mind, where he says, I'm not going to put anything on the floor for debate and a vote until the president guarantees he'll sign it. I don't think the president on this issue is a reliable partner. I think the Republicans in Congress who are reliable governing partners. I don't think the president's one of them. So we're going to have to take action in a concerted way, in a bipartisan way in the Senate to put it in front of the president. If he vetoes it, then that takes us into a different chapter. But we can't. I'm not sure I could rely upon him, even if he said it. I hereby pledge to Mitch McConnell I will sign these two bills. I'm just not sure he's
I
reliable.
already did that too. I already
Yeah.
pulled back on that.
Yeah.
And then the last one, and then you need to get on the word. Immigration.
We're here for a couple more hours. Thank you.
I do have 2 things I want
Sure.
to ask you.
Just real quickly, immigration. I mean, that's absolutely Now, do you have any, I'm sure you don't have a simple solution, but is there any particular method you back?
I actually do have a simple solution, but it's a complicated piece of legislation, but it's one where you have consensus on. The best thing we should do on immigration right now, in terms of policy, is to take the 2013 immigration bill, which got 68 votes in the U.S. Senate, 68 votes on a comprehensive bill that dealt with tough subject matter. That wasn't 50 years ago. Even I can do the math, right? And by the way, if the House had considered that, Speaker Boehner chose not to have a vote. If he allowed a vote, I think it might have passed. I think he was worried to be out of a job, and the right would throw him out, or someone would call for his head. But if we take the 2013 bill, which had it at when you add up the dollars, about 45 billion for border security. That was passed by the Senate, which is a higher number than I've seen anyone, even the president, propose. We would be 6 years into that, using the absolute best technology to secure the border. Now we'd have to update it for what I think is a newer problem, where if you want to stop the drugs, whether it's methamphetamine or cocaine or heroin, fentanyl is also relevant here, but fentanyl comes in from China and through the U.S. mail. That's a whole other issue. But ports of entry are where the drugs are coming in, for the most part. 80% or higher percent of those drugs I mentioned are coming in. You would have to update that immigration bill to deal with that newer phenomenon that may not have been the reality 6, 7 years ago. But you could also update other parts of it. But the 2013 bill dealt with all the big issues. It dealt with border security, and there had to be a certification that the border was secure, and there was a lot of dollars to get us there. In fact, they probably would be secure right now, 6 years later, pretty darn close. It dealt with citizenship, that there is a path to citizenship, but there are a lot of hurdles. You got to learn English. You got to pay money. You got to surmount a lot of hurdles before you become a citizen. That was in that bill. It was bipartisan. There was a guest worker program in that bill, so that agricultural communities can have certainty and rules and order for how you deal with guest workers to farm our lands and do jobs that won't get done otherwise. So it dealt with all the big issues. It was the result of 4 Democratic senators, 4 Republican senators hammering it out together. Two of the 4 Republican senators are still there, Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. The 4 Democratic senators are still there. Schumer, Durbin, Bennett, and Menendez. They're all still there. My point is that if we came together and just tuned out the president's rhetoric for a minute, don't listen to that rhetoric for a couple of months, pass a bill like we did in 2013, now the House would pass it rather easily. There might be some debates. Some Democrats may not like where it is now. There would be a broad consensus that we can fix this problem over time. It might take us 25 years to fix our immigration system, but at least we'd be well on the way to fixing a broken system. But the president would help matters if he would forget the poisonous rhetoric, forget using immigration to divide people, which I think is his intent. Let's talk about what works. Let's talk about a newer version of the 2013 bill, which I'll say again got 68 votes in the U.S. Senate. That doesn't mean it got 2 or 3 Republican votes. I think, frankly, the president scared Republicans into a corner because they don't even want to talk about it.
Can you bring it back up? Can you be one that sponsors that?
Well, I support it, but the only way this happens is if a similar bill is introduced and goes through the Judiciary Committee again, and has the kind of requires, and then gets to the Senate floor, and Leader McConnell, he's still the leader when this would happen, would allow a vote on it.
But the data, the information in there, you think would work?
Well, I think the
tenets
provisions,
of that, the
because it deals with the big issues, right? You can't talk about fixing the system unless you're dealing with border security, guest worker, program. There are others in there, but that's the lead.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that bill also included, funds for a wall too, did it not? Or some sort of barrier.
It had dollars for border security. It wasn't a wall, but it was, it would have been some of the continuation of the border security that was in place.
But no physical wall?
No, it didn't have that kind of specific language. Um, but there are places where um, fencing has been part of our border security for a long time. Uh, I just think it's misleading to say, often said, if you have this wall in place, that the problem goes away. We know from folks who work in the Defense Department that there's technology that can allow us to do the kind of border security we need. But most of the problem at the border in terms of drugs is at ports of entry. They need like infrastructure upgrades. I think what we should do, and the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. McAleenan, is very smart, spent a lot of time on border security, spent years at it. I wish he would speak up more, but we were just at the border about 2 months ago with him, a group of senators. Mr. McAleenan has testified in one period of testimony he gave in 2017. He talked about a system you could put in place at the border so that you're doing the kinds of inspections of vehicles and cargo that should. Now, I would prefer, now some would say, oh, this isn't workable, but let's try it. Single vehicle at port of entry. Every single piece of cargo, every single possible way to smuggle drugs in. As you know, they come in compartments. Drugs aren't coming in because a guy is walking across the border and his pockets are full. That's not the drug problem that we're seeing. We're seeing it, lots of drugs stored in vans and cars and trucks and compartments. Lots of drugs coming through cargo. So let's really get rigorous in that kind of inspection. And again, you need physical infrastructure, you need the best state-of-the-art technology that can literally do the X-rays of those. That's not a technical term, but of that kind of.
It's a family.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Senator. You mentioned just in passing that you support Joe Biden. Why?
3 reasons. Number one, his character and his integrity. I've known him a long time, and I've been around long enough that I know character and integrity when I see it, and he has it. Has a deep reservoir of that. And I'm not just saying that because he was born in Scranton, like I was, and lived there for 10 years. But I know him. I know his integrity. I know his heart. And character still should matter in elections, especially for executive positions. If you were running for president or mayor or governor or county commissioner, or even a legislative position, and you have bad character, that should be relevant in the election. We don't like robots, and their character doesn't matter. So, I think that for me, number one. Number two is he's got also a deep reservoir of years dealing with very difficult issues, domestic and international issues. His time as vice president just added to that, where President Obama gave him substantial responsibility. He had to deal with international issues. He was dealing with the Recovery Act, trying to get the Recovery Act through the Senate, which was hard. We barely got it through. We needed 60 votes. To give you an example, Pennsylvania got about $19 billion over, I think it was a roughly 4-year time period, from the Recovery Act. And thank God we did. That's one of the reasons why our economy in Pennsylvania recovered, is because we got that kind of help. Because when the private marketplace or the private financing is frozen because of the terrible economy we've had, the only way to jumpstart the economy is to have public investment, which we did, and thank God it's worked pretty well. And the third reason I support him is not just integrity and experience, but the future. One thing that has not gotten a lot of attention in these debates or in the back and forth, for lots of different reasons, which I'll go into, his ideas on improving the Affordable Care Act, getting costs down, getting premiums down for those who have coverage now, but they have insurance, but their costs are too high, but their deductibles are too high. They have insurance and they have a subsidy, but the subsidy isn't working for them in terms of cost as they hope it would. He's got good ideas on healthcare. He's got good ideas on job creation, good ideas on criminal justice reform, good ideas on climate change, good ideas on energy. And as the campaign goes on, people will hear more about his ideas. And I think in the end, um, character matters, experience matters, but ideas are mostly what people vote on.
When you talk about his character and integrity, do you think these accusations, for lack of a better term, are unfounded and unfair whenever they talk about his, record of voting when it came to the busing issue? The Kamala Harris brought up?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with anyone pointing out how you voted in the Senate and what that means for today. And he's dealt with those who continue to deal with those votes and those positions. But in the end, I think people are mostly going to vote on what you're proposing to do as president.
So do you think that's a smirch on his character and integrity?
I don't. No, I don't. I think some of the questions have been raised. They're about positions you took and how that's relevant to today.
Who should his vice president?
Well, you can promise to keep it a secret. I already know. No. No, I think he's going to have to make that determination. Speculate about that.
Will you actively campaign for him?
Sure. I already have. I'll keep doing that. But I think it's too early to even talk about who a running mate might be.
Well,
Because he's got to get nominated. We haven't had one vote.
Yeah, that would make my head.
What's that?
That would make my head.
Yeah, right.
Thank you guys. I actually have to get him
I've got
going.
him
Sorry.
I know. One more quick question,
Yeah.
Essential Air Service, they have a.
Yeah, I know that's on
loss of
appeal,
that.
and we're going to continue to support the appeal. Look, that's one area where I've gone to bat on for a long time, for a lot of the airports in our state. And some wise guys in Washington sometimes two branches of the government about this for years. They say, "Oh, well, that's a small airport, and federal government doesn't really support it." Well, it's pretty damn important to me because it's in Pennsylvania, so we're going to keep fighting for it. And the reason because they are essential. Very difficult for a community to thrive economically if you don't have an airport that's within a reasonable distance. And just like folks in rural areas who, and there are 6,000 or 7,000 people in Venango County who don't have broadband, high-speed internet. Just like those families in Venango County and in rural Pennsylvania deserve better broadband, which both parties have failed to provide more help for. They also deserve essential air service. So we're going to keep fighting for it.
There's one question if I may ask you. It's, again, this is on a state level, which I know is not your realm, but at the same time, it's something that has this county and also out in your place, out Whitehaven, out in Luzerne County. I mean, there is the closure of these national centers, not just these two, it's become part of the national discussion.
Right.
Even the president has spoken about it nationally, it coming out as opposed to it. Now they want to close these centers and basically relocate these folks to these group homes, which arguably they say, okay, they would thrive better there under the ADA, but then you've got some people who just cannot basically thrive in those types of settings. Now, being that you're a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, how do you feel about that? And if you are opposed to it, is there anything as a U.S. Senator that you could possibly have any sway as far as getting, say, Chuck Schumer to address the issue with the president?
Here's what I should do. First of all, it's a state issue. I don't make the decisions. It's a decision by the governor, and ultimately the oversight of it by the General Assembly. I've also been, I don't think there's another senator in the country, literally no one, who's done more on disability issues than I have. I want to make sure that if first and foremost, when a decision is made about a person with a disability, at any level of government, that we move heaven and earth if necessary to make sure that that individual is not only respected and provided with protection of rights, but also has policy that makes sure that they're in a facility or if they're in a home-based setting, that they're getting the services they need and the support they need. Services and support, both words are important. And my record has been and will continue to be making sure that happens. But again, in terms of federal work and policy to protect Medicaid, these people, these individuals are directly dependent upon Medicaid. Second, I have new legislation which we're going to be introducing and hoping to get a Republican co-sponsor. We should expand Medicaid services to make sure that more people home and community-based services that they need. So that's number one. We got to make sure that no matter what the setting, that person with a disability has all that they need, because that's what the ADA was all about. It's a quarter of a century old, but we still have not fulfilled the goals of the ADA. And second, those who are employed at Polk or at Whitehaven or any other facility, we got to make sure that they can transition. Now, the Hamburg Center, which is in Berks County, went through a similar process, I guess, about a year ago. And we've got to make sure, and we're told that in both instances, the transition for the individual with a disability, as well as the transition for the worker, we're told by the state that that's been positive. If that's the case, we need to follow that model. If that's not the case, and I can't certify that it is, I haven't investigated, but if it's not the case, then we've got to make damn sure that the individual with a disability and the worker are help and support that they need. And we know that this state has transitioned over my lifetime from a center-based model to a home and in the 1960s, we had about 13,000 people and I've been to Polk. One of the institutions we would audit and was Polk, and I was Auditor General. But about 13,000 people, we're told, were in centers like that. Very few people were in the community. That's reversed a lot. So now we have something on the order of, we're told by the state, 40,000 people in the community. The numbers in the centers are now in the hundreds.
Can you see the validity
Yeah.
of those?
So we made it. Yeah.
Can you see the validity in having both community service and institutional?
Well, there are some people, some individuals, even as policy is implemented, who will still be in centers. It's a lower number. It's in the I think it's in the, you wrote it down, 400 range, I think. Mm-hmm. We're told by the state, these are state numbers, that that if Polk and Whitehaven closed, the number of people in Commonwealth institutions would decrease to just over 400. But that's a small number, but that they may, if a medical professional tells us that there are a small number of people that still need to be in that particular facility and getting that kind of support and service, then that's what we should listen to. I'm not going to make that decision, of course. But.
And on that note, I'm so sorry, I've got to get you out. They're yelling at me.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for all the time. Thank you.
Oh, no, we're already.
Thank you.
I'm in trouble.